What's up, y'all? It's Drewski, and I've teamed up with Mountain Dew to produce a hilarious new basketball podcast called The Dew Zone with Drewski. Learn the backstories of your favorite ballers and celebrities like Jamal Murray.
Did you have like a favorite team? Was it the Raptors at the time or no? Was the Raptors even started around that time?
Come on, bro.
I ain't that old, fam. You talking like I'm 50.
Taylor Rooks, Asia Wilson, and many more. You won't want to miss this. Listen to The Dew Zone with Drewski on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey there. We at Blue Wire just wanted to take a second to thank you for listening to this podcast. We know everything outside is pretty scary and uncertain, but we're committed to helping you get through your day by talking about the sports and teams that you love most. If you're looking for more great podcasts to distract you, check out BlueWirePods.com. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the podcast and stay safe.
The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast.
Robinson on Barkley. It's his game to win, or we go to overtime. Barkley, 20-footer, yes! Charles Barkley with an MVP jump shot.
Welcome to the Timeline, a Phoenix Suns podcast. This week, we actually are going to talk about the Phoenix Suns instead of the depressing news all around the world, which we had to cover last week. But now we're back in the swing of things. We feel a little bit more able to talk about basketball now. My name is Mike. Of course, I'm here with Sam Cooper. Sam, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Mike, I've been outside a handful of times this week, just enough to not be vitamin D deficient, and now I'm ready to come back and talk about the Suns. I'm actually really excited for this episode, A, because of the guests we've had on, or we're having on, who we've had on this podcast before, but B, because it was actually an idea from a listener to kind of turn our focus towards some Suns history, and just using the month of March kind of as a lens for that. I'm happy with what we're going to be talking about.
Yes, we're going to talk about what Suns fans, or I should say at least fans of the podcast, voted on as the best Suns team, the greatest Suns team of all time. And to talk about that with us, we are joined by one of the hosts of the Solar Panel podcast. I know you guys all know about that podcast. It's Greg Esposito. Espo, how are you doing?
I am good. Let's be honest. You guys went, okay, we need an old guy that can talk about some of these teams in this tournament, and you went, the only guy that we're going to go with is Espo, because he can rattle on about those teams for a long time.
I mean, it's not just your age. You have the knowledge. The knowledge has to be debatable. There too.
I basically went to Mike and I said, what old fart can we bring on to talk about Suns history? I suggested your co-host with the Solar Panel, Dave King, first, but Dave's only been covering the Suns for about 10 years, so you were the perfect choice.
And Dave is in bed by the time we're recording this, so you wouldn't have had the ability to talk to him. I think he goes to bed at about 5:30 at night if there's not a game going on. So
yeah. I remember when I was a guest on your podcast, thanks again for that, we recorded at like 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I was like, oh no, I don't even know if I'm going to be up for that.
Yeah. Well, that's a byproduct of me having now a 3-year-old. When we started the show, I was on early morning daddy duty a lot, or I had to take the morning shift. So basically, we had to record it super early on a Saturday, otherwise we couldn't do it. So that's how that all started, with the show being so early in the morning, and we can blame my young daughter for that.
I was impressed. I was impressed with your guys' ability to be sort of mentally aware that early in the morning. That's not me. I'm not that guy.
Nobody has ever accused the three of us on that show of being mentally aware at any time of day. So don't worry about that.
So the last time you joined us was when we did our sort of retrospective episode on the 2009-2010 team, which of course was one of the teams that we are included in this bracket that we're about to go through. But from what I remember about that conversation between you and I, Greg, was that you did not start covering or working for the team, I should say, until the season after that. Is that right?
Yeah, it started in 2011, covering or working for the team. Was covering the team for Arizona Sports. I was running their website at the time, so. Covered the team there, and then covered them previously with another website that I had run with Vince Marotta called Fanster.com. So had covered them for a while. Hadn't worked for the team yet at that point, and then I've been a fan since longer than I'd like to admit. But the early '90s was when I started being quite aware of the team, but I've done my research throughout the history of this franchise, having worked around it and been around it for as long as I have.
So that was the Gortat team, right?
That was one of the Gortat teams. He is actually one of my favorite players I ever covered in basketball. One of the funniest guys. One of my favorite stories is the first year I was with the team. I started the team's official podcast at the time called Suns One-on-One, and I would sit down with a player, and I sat down with him, and we had this 45-minute discussion on the practice court, and I had to cut a good 7 minutes out of that show because he went on a tirade about how he was better than Dwight Howard, and it was just full of curse words, and I was like, if I run this, I'm going to get fired. And ever since then, he and I have been friends. We still talk. I mean, as much friends as somebody who worked for the team and somebody who played for the team can be, but we still talk through Twitter, DM all the time, and reach out to each other. So yeah, Marchin is one of my irrational favorites to ever don a Suns uniform.
He was a funny dude, but he also sort of had that reputation of getting himself in trouble with the media a little bit, maybe with some of those Polish interviews he did that I guess he thought wouldn't get translated back into English. So based on your story there, that makes a lot of sense. But also, Espo, I just want to ask you, you said you've been following since the early 90s. Do you have an earliest memory of, positive experiences with Suns basketball?
I think I think the earliest that I remember vividly is the announcement of the Barkley trade. That was right. I was 9 at the time, and I had just started heavily listening to sports radio, which is kind of sad as a 9-year-old. That's what I did, but I listened to sports radio heavily back then, as I continue to this day. And I remember the news about Barkley, and then I remember kind of the excitement around that dream team, and that was it. The love affair started then, and I remember vividly almost every season between then and now. Although I've attempted to erase the last 10 years out of my mind, but unfortunately have been incapable of doing that. But yeah, so I remember a lot of the last almost 3 decades worth of Suns basketball.
This might be a weird question, but are you happy that you worked for the team? And I know that that's kind of a weird way to put that, but I mean, part of what I sort of enjoy in doing this podcast and sort of covering the team the way that Sam and I do is sort of having the ability to kind of say whatever we want, whenever we want, without any sort of consequences or repercussions. But I imagine that you have personal relationships. Like, I'm sure you've met Robert Sarver before, for example.
Numerous times.
You've had interactions with him. Do you think, how does it feel to cover the team after that?
Well, it's not a weird question because it's one I actually have asked myself, and I almost didn't take the job with the Suns because of that. Because, like I said, I was at Arizona Sports, not that, hey, I get to be around sports, I get to cover it, I'm not restrained in anything I can say or anything I can do. And it was actually my wife that convinced me, no, you've got to go take the chance to work for a team that you loved since you were a kid, and I don't regret working for the team. I loved being around the basketball side of it. I got the pure honor of being on the same broadcast as Al McCoy, a man who his calls of Suns games are a big part of why I am a fan and will always be a fan of this team. So those things I wouldn't trade for anything. And the memories and getting to work with great people like John Bloom and Julie Fye, who's the head of basketball communications, and so many people around there. Tom Leander, another great guy. The coaching staff and the players, guys like Goran Dragic that I got to know, and Eric Bledsoe that I genuinely like as human beings. I wouldn't change that. And even Lon Babby. Lon gets a hard time from a lot of the fans, but there was not a nicer man to me in that organization. He was always a true gentleman to me. But the one part of it that was really difficult, well, two. You don't get to say what your actual opinion is. You have to kind of couch that a little bit, which I worked there through some rough times, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of it is you wind up learning the reality that a lot of sports is business, and it comes down to spreadsheets and dollars and cents, and that disillusions you a little bit, because as a fan, it's not about that at all. It's about winning. It's about the passion. It's about what it means to a city to have a team and have a great team and those kind of things. And you can't put that genie back in the bottle once you work for a team. It changes your perception there, but it really hasn't. Another case in point, Ryan McDonough was a great guy, a guy that I would consider friendly with, but it really doesn't prohibit me now coming back to the other side of it of speaking my mind. I mean, if you've listened to our show, which I don't know if anybody has, but if people have listened to it, I'm not shy about my disdain for certain things that Robert Sarver or front offices or coaching staff, anybody has done. I'll be very honest about it. I'll share my experiences about it, and so to long answer to your question, I've thought about it. I don't regret it, but there are certain things that you go, well, that'll never quite be the same as a fan after seeing how the sausage was made.
That's really interesting, and I've thought about the same. Sometimes I've seen some job postings by the Suns, and I look, wait, would I like to do that or not? But I appreciate your time working there. I watched every season while you were there. I remember the Rise Network. I remember you guys broadcasting some of the preseason games. I think you had a big part in that, so I appreciate all of that.
Thank you.
And I think you did a good job while you're there, and I appreciate you coming on with us. And
I appreciate that. I know not everybody agrees with that, but that I appreciate you saying that, and we tried our hardest to do it. And one quick story I think you guys will enjoy. When I started at the Suns, the second week I was there, Julie Fye, as I mentioned, head of basketball communications, walked up to me and goes, I have a file on you. And I went, well, I guess my time here's done. 2 weeks was good, right? And she goes, I have a file of everything negative you ever wrote. And I'll say this about it. She goes, you were always fair. And when I found out we were hiring you, I was happy about it, because even though you had been negative about us, you were fair about it. You were factual about it. And that moment I always respected, and that was kind of a guiding principle for me. As long as I could stand behind how I was criticizing something and why, it was all right. And I think that a lot of people forget that when covering teams. And I think you guys do a great job of it. You're always very thoughtful and considerate in the way you go about things. So I appreciate that about your show and what you guys do.
Thank you for that. Sam, do you think Julie has a file on us?
That's what I was going to say. It's kind of terrifying to think that you went through years of articles that you wrote.
Yeah. Well, that's
I can't
her
imagine
job,
she's listened to our podcast.
She probably has teams of interns listening to all of our podcasts. Yeah. They still let me in the building, so I guess they're not too mad about it. So
I will say, and I'm not, for the record, I'm not criticizing this person for doing this. But one time a salesman texted me, you know how they have your information if you've entered into contests and all that.
Yep.
And said, hey, Mike, I love your podcast. If you need any help getting into Suns games, let me know. And I was like, oh, that's a little weird.
Yep.
It was a compliment, so it was nice. But also knowing that someone who listens to the podcast now has my phone number and likely my address in a file somewhere kind of shook me to my core a little bit.
Don't worry. They all know where we all live, so it's all right. Yeah.
All right, let's get into it. So, Sam, I want to thank you for the work that you put into this, because Sam put together this bracket.
The people did all the work, really.
Yeah, they did all the voting, but you had to get it all together. And just to go through the seeds, and then we'll go through each round together to talk about what people picked and what our thoughts are on that. The number one seed was, of course, the 92-93 Suns. They had to be the closest to winning a championship. I guess the 75-76 Suns were in there as well, but the 92-93 Suns, MVP Charles Barkley, of course, and going against Michael Jordan in those NBA Finals, that had to be the number one seed. The two seed was the 04-05 Suns. Sam, I think you chose that team because of the record as the two seed. Is that right?
Yeah, I hope the seeding doesn't come under too much scrutiny here, as if I had like an actual system. Because for a second I thought about developing some sort of system. I would say just roughly it's like a combination of best regular season records, deepest playoff runs, and other things. You know, it was kind of weird because it's like the 76 team that went to the finals, that was a 42-win team, but they went to the finals. So, you know, I knew that they had to be in the top 8 somewhere just by virtue of that and kind of respecting that deep playoff run. So, like, they were in there somewhere. But, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, 2005 was tied for the best regular season record with 93, and so I made them the second seed.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. 94-95 Suns, another Charles Barkley team, was the 3 seed. 4 seed 06-07 Suns, which I think may have been everyone's second favorite team based on the votes. We'll talk a little bit about that. That team went 61-21, of course, an excellent team. The 75-76 Suns that went to the finals, as Sam said, the 42-40 team was the 5 seed 9-10 Suns, which is one of my personal favorite teams just because of how likable they were. And of course, the podcast that all three of us have a lot of experience talking about on this actual podcast. And then the 88-89 Suns were the 7 seed, and the 8 seed was the 80-81 Suns, which got no love in this bracket. I think it'll be interesting to talk about that team. Let's talk about the first matchup, which was a complete, absolute blowout. It was the 1 seed versus the 8 seed. I understand the voting for this one, but it was 97% in favor of the 92-93 Suns versus the 80-81 Suns. ESPO, do you think that's specifically because the average age of the people who listen to this podcast
is 14?
Well, I joked about it on Twitter with you guys that recency bias was going to be the winner of this tournament, but I don't think this is necessarily the case here, because that 80-81 team had some good players on it. You're talking about Alvin Adams, who's an all-time great for the Suns, Walter Davis, obviously an all-time great, Truck Robinson, Dennis Johnson. I mean, there's some good names there, but this is also a team who was the best team in the league in the West. 1 seed got a weird bye in the first round of the playoffs. The league was doing some weird stuff back in the early 80s, and then lost to the Kings in the second round. They basically came out and just laid an egg the first chance that they got in the playoffs. So there's a reason that it's not a real memorable team when you think about Suns lore because they were probably one of the biggest disappointments in terms of the potential that they had and how far they fell. And when you think about the love affair with this city still to this day, and I'm one of those people who grew up loving this 92-93 team, I think it's realistic that this is the way the voting would go. But I have a question for you guys because I did some research and did something that I'd like to discuss, but was the thought of this tournament, if these two teams actually played, what would the result be, or based on just popularity? What was the thought?
Yeah, so I think I didn't do a great job with explaining exactly what those intentions should be. My thought was, how cool would it be if these two teams actually played each other on the court? And I know that's tougher, because then you have to bring in the whole conversation of, okay, which rules are we playing with? Especially if it's a team like 1976, that's pre-3-point line. But so I know it's tougher, but I thought, like, as I was envisioning these matchups, I was really trying to imagine the starting fives playing against each other, what those specific matchups are. And yeah.
Okay, so that is the way I took it, and I went a step further because when you guys invited me on, I said I'm going to do more research for this show than I do for my own show, which is none on the solar panel. But here I actually went through and prepared. I have used a tool, a simulation tool before, where you can actually match up old teams against each other. We did this with the Suns in my first year with the digital team, and we all drafted all-time great Suns teams and then simulated a tournament. It was we had Leander, a bunch of guys in there who drafted teams. So when I heard you guys were doing this, I immediately turned to this and simulated this. So this game between 92-93 and 80-81, obviously the 92-93 team was the home team based on your seeding, and they would have won 122 to 110. This program basically simulates 1,000 versions of a game and gives you an aggregate of it.
Wow.
And it actually produces a box score as well. And Barkley would have dominated this matchup. 33 points, 17 rebounds, 6 assists is what he would have had in this game. Dan Marley also would have added in 24 points, 4 rebounds, three blocks, 3 steals. So Marley would have had a pretty impressive game, and nobody other than Dennis Johnson on that 80-81 team really would have had a big game. He had 27 in the simulation. So I think your voters, the fans of the Timeline podcast, got this right. So
what's the
simulation?
What's the name of that program?
It's called What If Sports.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I mean, look, I think there's this temptation to just talk about the 93 team as we move through this bracket, framing it as, that was MVP Barkley. But I think the other thing we can talk about there is just how deep that team was and how much that would have prevailed in this game too. That roster, maybe more than any other roster in this bracket, just 8 to 10 solid guys who could just really, really score. About the 81 team, I just want to say before we move on, I was happy to include that team just because I feel like that's a bit of a forgotten era of Suns basketball, if there is any forgotten era. This was the first year post Paul Westphal, and kind of the franchise turning a new corner in that direction. I mean, obviously they had a young Walter Davis at that point who would continue to be with the team for many years, but not a single player on that roster was over the age of 30, and they won 57 games and had some great names, as you said, ESPO, with Dennis Johnson, Truck Robinson, and Alvin Adams still. So, just that team being able to go so far, even if they did get bounced by the Kings, with such a young roster is kind of impressive and deserves some just a shout out.
Yeah. I think too, they got it right. I agree with you, Greg, but I will say that any of these sort of older teams in the 70s and 80s are just sort of disadvantaged in general, not just because our fan base is young. It's also because the NBA was not the same back then. A lot of guys were still smoking cigarettes or had second jobs. Like, it's not the way that training and the way that athletes have evolved over the course of time would put them all at sort of a disadvantage. And they were a tall team, of course, those Suns teams. They had size. But they weren't quite the athletes that 92-93 team was. And I think there's really, if they did play, as fascinating as it would have been to watch, they were at a massive disadvantage, and that's a really cool program that you found, Greg, and I think that sounds accurate to me. Although I would have expected a little more of a blowout by the 92-93 team, I think.
Well, look, for me, what strikes me as interesting is, to your point about late 70s, early 80s teams, I think Alvin Adams would have been an ultimate stretch 4 in today's game if he played. He was an unbelievable passer, could shoot very well.
Yep.
Just had a huge basketball IQ. He played center for those Suns teams, but I think he would have been a stretch 4 and would have shot threes in today's game. It would have been. I think he would have been even better than he was, and he's one of the all-time great Suns.
And that's what we can talk about with a lot of these guys, is if they grew up today, they would be trained in a different way and coached in a different way from a young age. They would be encouraged to shoot threes. And I think it's really applicable. Like Alvin Adams averaged 4.5 assists per game that season. He led that team that we're talking about, the 81 team in assists, more so than any guard on the roster. Where do we see that in today's NBA? I mean, it's shades of Nikola Jokic is what you're talking about. There's a different physical profile, obviously, with Adams, but I think there would be potential for him to kind of fit that archetype in today's league.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't know is, Kareem actually said that Alvin Adams was one of the toughest guy he had to go up against in the West during his time. So all-time great center, giving that kind of love to Alvin Adams, that I think he's a guy that gets completely overlooked when looking back at Suns history. So I want to just give him his due. He'll show up in one of the, or actually no, this is the only team he shows up in other than the 75-76. So I just wanted to make sure to give him his due before we moved off of this team.
Yeah, did Alvin work for the team when you worked there?
Yes, and Alvin is another one of those great human beings. Amazing guy, and if you ever get the chance to meet him, I highly recommend having a conversation. He's got so many great stories. Not only was he one of the best Suns players, but remember, 92-93, when Shaq was a rookie and he broke the backboard here in Phoenix, Alvin Adams was the guy that actually had to figure out how they could fix it, and then figure out for the rest of the season how you could actually tether a hoop so it wouldn't break the way Shaq broke it. So fun little story, because he manages the arena and has since 92-93. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's move on to the second round or second matchup here. Of course, we're going to get back to that 92-93 team. I know you could imagine it got pretty far in this bracket. The second matchup was the 04-05 Suns team, which appeared to be a favorite online, versus the 89 Suns team, which I think didn't quite get their due here. I'd like to hear what you guys think of this, but the 04-05 team got 93% of the votes in this one. And I thought this was actually, in my opinion, I think this was the most interesting sort of point guard matchup, other than like when Nash went versus Nash in some of these matchups here. But this was sort of a younger Kevin Johnson. Of course, Kevin Johnson was on that 92-93 team, but he was a little up and down, battled back from some injuries that year. Still an excellent player, but this 89 Suns team had some pretty impressive players. This was, of course, pre-Charles Barkley, and they had, of course, Kevin Johnson, Tom Chambers, Eddie Johnson, one of the greats on this team. Tom Chambers averaged 25.7 points in that 88-89 season. Kevin Johnson, 20 points and 12 assists, which is just insane. Russell Westbrook type numbers in that season. But they didn't get much votes. Sam, what did you think about this matchup?
What was it? The final tally, like 87-13
no,
or
it's
something?
93% voted
93-7.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's showing the age a little bit, but I do think 2005 is the better team ultimately. That's just funny. I think ultimately, it being pre-Charles Barkley is kind of the thing that distinguishes this team a little bit from other teams. Obviously, the 89 team went to the Western Conference Finals. They were not supposed to win as many games as they did, winning 55 games. And Tom Chambers being the leading scorer on that team, almost 26 points per game, naturally very impressive. But I think when you put Tom Chambers maybe against prime Amari Stoudemire, you get kind of like a similar type of player. It's not the same sort of dominant gap that there would be between a guy like Charles Barkley and Amari, where Barkley is really able to create his own shot consistently. You can run an offense through him. He can play make for others. Tom Chambers, maybe not quite that guy. He's similar to Amari in that he was a phenomenal finisher, had all sorts of floater touch. He could jump over anybody, and just a great play finisher and a great 1-2 punch with him and Kevin Johnson. But when you put the two teams together, I do think 2005 has not necessarily the greater depth overall, because they weren't a very deep team, but the greater number 3 and number 4 kind of supporting players. Sean Marion and Joe Johnson as a 3-4 punch is just absurd. And it's hard for me to consider how the 89 team would stop that. The only other thing I'll say about this one is our dear friend Eddie Johnson with his feelings about the three-point shot. I want to point out, 1989 is the only season in EJ's career that he shot over 40% from three-point range. That was also the year he won his only award, his lone sixth man of the year. Is that a coincidence? Probably. But I'm gonna throw that out there anyway, and you know, maybe just think about that a little bit.
Man,
ESPO, what
you
think
bought
of this?
you. No, I think it was an interesting matchup that probably didn't get its fair due in the voting, because this was the 88-89 team was one of the biggest comeback seasons in NBA history. 87-88 was the aftermath of the cocaine Suns and the suspensions and the drama and everything that went along with that. And in one off season, they completely remade the roster. They completely changed everything about that team. Colangelo and Cotton Fitzsimmons did a complete overhaul. They signed Tom Chambers as the first unrestricted free agent in NBA history. And Chambers had an unbelievable season. I don't think people remember necessarily how much of a freak athlete Tom Chambers was and how big of a star he was at that point. He had an unbelievable year the previous year with the Sonics. Had a huge All-Star game in 87-88. Came to the team and was a dominant force. And KJ, this is second year KJ, young, athletic before the injuries, defensively a real stopper. I mean, it was a pretty deep squad. So I don't think the voting necessarily reflected how I think this team would have hung in with the 04-05 team. I think KJ probably would have handled Nash in a way that Nash was not used to being guarded by a lot of guys in his era. Amari and Chambers would have been just an unbelievable athletic duel. I think where it probably would have gone in favor of the 04-05 team was Joe Johnson versus Jeff Hornacek. Jeff Hornacek would not have been able to contain a young Joe Johnson. And then you're looking at Sean Marion versus Dan Marley or Eddie Johnson at certain points in the game. There's just no way that they could have guarded him. The athleticism would have been just overwhelming for those guys. So when you look at it, I ran the simulation here too, and it would have been a 111-102 victory for the 04-05 Suns. But according to the simulation, it would have taken a fourth quarter where the 04-05 team outscored the 88-89 team by 13 points to wind up winning. So that 88-89 team would have had a lead going into the fourth based on the simulation.
And this, I think, the 88-89 team was mentally for me the most interesting team to think about, just because this team, actually, the way that it's put together would be a fascinating modern NBA team had they played more like a modern NBA team. And I'll tell you some of the reasons why. Eddie Johnson, for example, who was insanely efficient this year, 49.7% from the field, also 41.3% from three, but he only took 2.5 3-point attempts per game. This team also had a 23-year-old Steve Kerr, who even at 23 years old was shooting 47% from three, and he shot less than one per game. Now, that's partially because he didn't get a ton of minutes. He was playing just kind of deep bench minutes, but had they been coached by sort of a modern coach, I imagine Steve Kerr, Eddie Johnson, Jeff Hornacek, by the way, only took 1 3-pointer per game as well. He only shot 33%, but had he trained sort of more like a modern player, we all know that Jeff Hornacek is a better shooter than a 33% 3-point shooter. These guys would be launching threes around Kevin Johnson, just driving to the rim with Tom Chambers, of course, another good 3-point shooter. I think that if they were to play a little differently, this team would be pretty amazing. They just have so many guys who can shoot threes. Eddie Johnson, Dan Marley, Steve Kerr, Jeff Hornacek, Tom Chambers for his position. Really, the worst shooter at their position would probably be Kevin Johnson, who still shot over 50% on 20 points per game. I think it's just sort of an interesting team mentally to think about, because of course they did not play like a modern NBA team. No team did at that time, but they were kind of built for it. So it was kind of an interesting team for me to think about. But I think the voters got it right. That 04-05 team, I think that's the team that so many Suns fans, along with this 2007 team, I think look back on and have the most feelings of sort of what if, because there's so much talent on that team. So much. And it just never, for various reasons, Amari Stoudemire's injury, Joe Johnson breaking his face, Joe Johnson ending up leaving. Of course, there's so many reasons, and even Marion being gone, like, for example, in that 09-10 team, which sort of had a surprising 3 seed in the playoffs. I think there's just so much what if going back on that. So I understand why people voted for that team, and I do think they would have won. And that simulation, I think, adds to the case for that one. So
up until I think Kevin Durant joined the Warriors, I think I thought about the 2005 team as the most talented starting lineup we had seen in my lifetime. Even if it didn't win a ring, like, that's how talented those 5 were. The problem is the team's 5 deep. And you're talking about the 89 team kind of training like a modern team and launching threes. The thing about launching threes, as great and as brilliant as the mid-2000s run-and-gun Suns were with that strategy, it's a little bit corny to say, but in a single elimination style, it's a make-or-miss league, and the more threes you launch, the more variance there is.
Right.
Especially more so when you don't have a deep team and you have a team that relies on, like, if Q Rich and Joe Johnson don't hit their threes in that game and they're playing a similarly good team in 89, ESPO pointed out, his simulation said that was a close game until the fourth quarter. 89 could have pulled away with it, if a couple guys weren't hitting their corner threes. So I think that's the kind of margin of error we're dealing with. Nash probably still would have been very good, but who knows? If we're allowing hand checking, like Espo said, then maybe that would have really pressed him, and it could have been a really close game.
I think the thing we forget about that 04-05 team, too, is you had Leandro Barbosa, who was coming, learning the game and starting to have an impact, but you also had Stephen Hunter, who had a big year for that team before he signed a big contract with the 76ers. And even Casey Jacobson was a guy that could come in off the bench and shoot as well. So there was just a dearth of talent on that roster for sure.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think everyone did get it right. And that 04-05 team, of course, no spoilers, but it went pretty far as well. We'll just say that. Let's take a quick break for our sponsor here. We'll be back to talk about the rest of this first round and, of course, the rest of this bracket. With currently no NBA, NHL, or MLB, you might think there's nothing to bet on. Well, you'd be wrong. Our exclusive partner still has hundreds of sports, events, and games to wager on, or let them bring Vegas to you with their online casino and blackjack. all open 24 hours a day and all online, including their $750,000 poker series. If you're into props and entertainment betting, you can still bet on Survivor, Big Brother, American Idol, stock prices, and even the weather. Visit their website and join today to receive a 100% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Be sure to use the promo code BLUEWIRE. Bet online, your online wagering experts. All right, the next round we're going to cover, I talked about it a little bit when introducing this team. One of my favorite teams, and one that we covered extensively on this podcast, the 2009-2010 Suns versus the 94-95 Suns. So another very good team. This was the closest in the first round, the closest matchup that we had. 62% still voted for the 2009-2010 Suns team, which did make the Western Conference Finals. Of course, the tragic ending with the Game 5 miss by Kobe Bryant and Meta World Peace, known as Ron Artest at the time, making the putback. And then, of course, Game 6, Kobe Bryant went nuclear and the Suns went down. That 94-95 team was also still a very good team. ESPO, what do you think about this matchup?
I think this is the one out of the entire tournament that the fans got completely and utterly wrong.
Interesting.
So if you look at that 94-95 team, I will argue it was more talented than the 92-93 team. It was probably the best team that Barkley had around him in his time in Phoenix. If you remember, this was the year that Danny Manning signed a one-year deal to join the team. It was a number one pick in '88. Was in his prime at this point. It wasn't as if he was over the hill. He signed a 1 year, I believe it was $1 million contract. It was highly undervalued because he trusted Jerry Colangelo, and Jerry Colangelo said, if you sign this 1 year deal, I'm going to take care of you next year when we have the cap space. It was kind of a handshake deal like that. And at one point they were 36-10 in this season, the best record at that point. And this is where Joe Klein in practice falls on Danny Manning's knee, and Danny Manning blows out his knee. But even without Manning, they were an unbelievable team. You're talking Dan Marley, Charles Barkley, Kevin Johnson, Elliot Perry, Wes Person, Danny Manning, Danny Ainge, A.C. Green, Richard Dumas, Wayman Tisdale, Joe Klein. We're talking serious talent and serious depth around Barkley this year. And if it hadn't been for what I've been told was some poor decisions by Charles Barkley during the playoffs in terms of how hard he went out and had fun during that Houston Rockets series, I think this team probably is one of the biggest what-ifs to me in Suns history, because they go to 7 games against Houston in the playoffs, and they lose for a second straight year. That Houston team goes on to win its second straight title, but I think this is the team that should have won a title for the Suns. And frankly, as much as I love the 09-010 or 09-10 team, and that it was one of those true cases of chemistry being greater than the total sum of the talent on the roster, and they had an unbelievable run. It was so much fun. It was probably the most fun outside of 92-93 I've had as a Suns fan. Just fundamentally, that 94-95 team was better. And the simulation plays out that way, too. It would have been a 110-85 victory for the 94-95 team. And they would have outscored, in this simulation, they outscored the 09-10 team 38-8 in the fourth quarter. Wow. All right, like they just dominated this group. So I think this was certainly a recency bias factor here, because that 94-95 team was unbelievable.
Yeah, so I agree. But I think there's more. First of all, Espo's right. The fans got it wrong here. 95 would win. Recency bias definitely plays a huge role in it. But also, this is just, I think 2010 resonates as a story with a lot of Suns fans, particularly younger Suns fans, and more so, this speaks to the power of expectations. Kind of as you were talking about, Espo, the 95 team was supposed to go all the way with Jordan out of the picture. So when they lost, it leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. On the other hand, 2010, you remember, Mike, and both of you, media outlets were projecting that team to go 500 and completely miss the playoffs before the season started. So for that specific team, kind of with the lack of athleticism that it had, to rise to the occasion, get to the Western Conference Finals, it created an all-time amazing memory for Suns fans, particularly the younger ones that happen to follow this podcast. So that's definitely why it won. It wouldn't have won in a hypothetical matchup between those two. I guess the only thing I could say in defense of 2010 is that was one of the greatest, maybe the best three-point shooting team we've had still to this date in Suns history. And I looked it up. The 2010 team, it led the league in three-point shooting, 41%. The only two teams to shoot at least 40% from deep on at least 20 attempts per game in NBA history. It's that team and the 73-win Warriors. So, just the way that I was talking about last round with if the shots don't fall, 05 loses. With this one, if the shots fall, 2010 has a chance. If Jared Dudley and Channing Frye and Jason Richardson and all those guys kind of on the outskirts, if they're really popping and hitting their threes, then they have a chance. But overall, there's no one on that team that can stop Charles Barkley for starters.
There's no Marion.
There's no Marion. Yeah.
And Amari by that point is slowed by multiple knee injuries and isn't quite the same athletic guy as you saw in the 04-05 team too. But when you look at 94-95, though, they were no slouches when it came to three-pointers. I mean, Marley could shoot them. Barkley could.
It was Marley's best
could,
season.
Ainge could.
Yeah. Marley shot 6.7 3-pointers per game. That was the most of his career for just putting up 3-pointers, and he was making them at 36%. And they had a couple guys who would really launch the threes, and of course Marley being the main one. I think that Suns team, Sam, I think you nailed it there. The story is so good. It's such a feel-good story, unexpected one, where just people didn't expect it to be what it was. I think that there is just a case to be made in that there was a stretch of that season where Robin Lopez, who was having a good season, went down and he was injured, and the team started Channing Frye in his place, and that team was just so unguardable during that time. And I think that was one of those things that led to a massive change in how a lot of teams play in the NBA because of just the way they spread it out. And of course, as we know, Steve Kerr was involved with that team, and you see how he took that formula and just kind of stretched it out to the absolute extreme with some of the best shooters of all time. But I like the point you made, Sam. Maybe the best shooting Suns team from 3-pointers. They still did not shoot the most in the league. They did in previous seasons, 04, 05, and 07, I believe. Both of those seasons, they shot the most 3-pointers in the league. There's a case to be made that 2009-2010 team should have shot more. And I think this is kind of the weird history of the Phoenix Suns, where through today's lens, you look at every team and think, well, for one, Steve Nash should have shot more, and two, maybe the entire team should have shot more 3-pointers in general. But that was still a very good team, and I agree with both of you. I think that 94-95 team maybe didn't quite get its due in that matchup. We'll come back to that 2009-2010 team. I'm glad we got a little bit of talking about that 94-95 team. This next matchup was the 2006-2007 Suns versus the 75-76 Phoenix Suns, which in no way did I expect the 75-76 Suns to get past this first round. But I do still think it's kind of unfortunate, just because that's another one where the story was remarkable. There was a few weeks ago, I actually don't know, the concept of time has totally been lost on me, but we did a segment on our podcast, which thanks to Cody, of course, one of the producers for us, This Week in Suns History segment, where we actually went over what the 75-76 Suns team's record was at that time, and it was almost exactly the same as the 2019-2020 Suns team record. Just to show you how much the 75-76 team turned it on at the end of the season and were able to take that momentum into the playoffs as a team that was barely one game over 500, 2 games really, but they could have been 41-41 had they lost one more game. And then took that all the way to the finals where there was, most people I don't remember this. None of us on this podcast were even alive at this time, but from what people talk about who watched it, that was one of the most memorable finals of all time versus the Boston Celtics. But just to give it away here, 86.7% of Suns fans voted for the 07 team. And I'll be honest, that was probably less than I thought. I thought the 07 team was going to win a little more dramatically in that. I am interested, Greg, what the simulation said about this and, of course, how you felt about these results.
Well, the simulation said that the 06-07 team would have won 101-97.
Wow.
75,
close.
76.
Wow. That's really close.
And this was another case where it came down to the fourth quarter. Actually, the second half, the 76 team was leading. Looks like it was 56-45 going into halftime, and the 06-07 team kind of just powered its way through in the second half. A guy that I don't think current Suns fans know how good he was Paul Westphal, and the simulation showed that he had 34 points, 5 assists on 11 of 9 shooting. So I think that may be part of the factor here. That and Alvin Adams, who we talked about earlier, had 15 points, 15 rebounds in the simulation. So I think some fans probably didn't realize just how good those two guys were back then. And you guys talked about how that record was very similar to this year's Suns team until they went on a run at the end. And the thing was, they had a lot of injuries with that team. This was Alvin Adams' rookie year, so he was still kind of trying to find his way and hit his stride towards the end of the year. He won Rookie of the Year that year, but we all know, having experienced plenty of young guys over the last few years, that there's ups and downs in a rookie season. So yeah, I think the fans got the vote right.
Yeah,
I just don't think it should have been as big of a blowout, because there was something truly special about that 75-76 team, and they pushed one of the greatest franchises. And we're talking, this is the Celtics in the 70s. This is in the middle of their dominance, with Red Auerbach being the coach, and just them dominating the league. They pushed that team to the brink. I mean, it was another the only other Suns team to make a finals, and they really held their own there. I think, again, the athleticism in the end would have done them in, because when you're going against Amari, Nash, and Marion, you probably wouldn't keep up. But I certainly think it would have been closer than the vote indicated.
Greg, does that simulation include threes?
It does.
It does. How did the 76 team shoot?
They shot
long range?
33%, 5 of 15.
Wow.
Garherd and Westphal made 4 of the 5, which seems about right, especially Westphal. Yeah. I mean, he was a shooter and would have had the range to be able to do that. And actually, if you go back and watch that shot heard around the world that Garherd hits in those finals, it's not that far off from 3-point range, which actually could have won the game rather than tied it if that had been in play back then. So,
yeah, I watched the entirety of the overtimes for that game recently, just because we were preparing for that segment that we produced, and they shot shots. Like they were not pounding it on the inside. They shot a lot of jump shots. They were, for a team that didn't have any, that season had no 3-point line, and they actually did take a lot of shots. I think that 06-07 team was just so damn good and so well rounded. You know, the highest scoring player on that 06-07 team was Amare Stoudemire. He only averaged 20.4 points on that season. That's not a lot. And then you had Steve Nash with, you know, an incredible season, 18.6 points, 11.6 assists. Leandro Barbosa is probably his best season of his career with 18 points per game. And then you still had multiple guys that were in the teens with Sean Marion and Raja Bell with scoring. It was just so well-rounded. And of course, Boris Diaw on that team. James Jones, current general manager, with some highlights that season. Just a guy who basically Cam Johnson for the Suns now. That's how he played back then. And then, of course, Kurt Thomas was on that team. And then Pat Burke, of course, for a lot of Suns fans, me included, is a very memorable player on that team. One player that was not memorable and still has a grudge about it was Jalen Rose, who did not play a lot and still does not like Mike D'Antoni to this day when he talks about him and that season. Sam, what did you think about these results?
I'm not surprised. I think 07. I am surprised actually with the simulation being a 4-point difference. I think it likely would have been a wider gap than that. Excuse me 1 second. I have to cough.
Oh, no coughing, Sam.
No, I'm fine. I
Hopefully
promise.
into your elbow.
I'm fine. Social distancing. I'm at home, quarantined. The only thing I was going to say, and it's not really an interesting revelation. I don't know if this is well known or not, but I was just doing research on the 76 team. Gar Hurd is not the only one who was acquired mid-season by the Suns. Did you guys know that Pat Riley was on that team? Is that a well-known thing?
Yes, and he had the greatest mustache and the longest hair. It was unbelievable. You have to go back and find it. He had like a Fu Manchu mustache, a big old thing, really long hair, and dressed the part of a 70s player. It was unbelievable seeing Pat Riley on that team.
It was the final season of his career. He came from L.A., he only averaged 13 minutes per game, and in the playoffs, rotations get a little bit tighter. He played a total of 27 minutes in the playoffs over 5 games, including 1 minute against the Celtics in the finals. But I just thought that was interesting. I was like, well, I had to do a double take. I was like, wait, Pat Riley's a pretty common name. That has to be a different Pat Riley, right? Because I had just never heard of that.
I'm telling you, find the picture. Greatest mustache ever. By the way, the simulation was kind to Jalen Rose. He played 6 minutes, went 2 for 2, including a 3-pointer, had 5 points. So he technically would have been the difference in the simulation as they won by 4 points. So
I actually think that he has a right to be kind of angry that season. I'm surprised he didn't play more. He had some good seasons previous to that. Maybe it was an attitude thing, or maybe it was something he did in practice that caused him to lose minutes. But I'm surprised he didn't play that much. There were plenty of did not play DNPs on the box scores for Jalen Rose. So I understand why he would have been frustrated. Didn't seem to be a problem at the time, from what I remember. But I remember I was a fan of him on the previous teams that he played on before, and I was always surprised that he didn't play more minutes. So that's the entire first round. So that leaves the 93 Suns versus the 2007 Suns and the 05 Suns versus the 2010 Suns. Steve Nash versus Steve Nash. As you can see, our fans of this podcast do love Steve Nash, and I understand why. He's a very likable player, and I think there was so much. Those teams were so good from 2005 to 2010. It makes sense. The next round had the closest matchup so far. It includes a team that we just talked about, that 2007 team. I'm very interested in what the simulation that Greg's been running for us says about this, because this matchup was the Finals Suns team, the 92-93 Suns, versus the 2007 Suns, and the 93 Suns won by 0.5% of the vote. The closest one so far. I didn't do the calculation, but I imagine it's just 1 or 2 votes that it won by here, with 50.5% of the votes. That 93 Suns team won. This was a difficult one for me too, but I think I would have picked the 93 Suns here, but I don't think that it's insane to pick that 07 Suns team. I just think any team that really took Michael Jordan to the brink in the NBA Finals can sort of stand a chance against any team, period. Greg, why don't you give us your thoughts and, of course, the result of the simulation that you ran?
I voted for the 06-07 team in the poll, which was against my childhood self. He was screaming locked inside of me somewhere. But you just look at it, and again, it comes down to the athleticism. And this was, as much as a lot of guys didn't get rotational minutes, it still was a fairly deep team. Kurt Thomas and Barbosa, even Marcus Banks played minutes with that team. The simulation, and you guys aren't going to believe this because I didn't believe it, and I actually ran it multiple times, and the results were always within the same ballpark. It was a blowout for the 06-07 team. They won 122-86.
Wow.
122-86.
Yeah. And this is a case of, you said you live or die by the three-point shot, right? Well, they shot 60% from deep in the simulation, with the 92-93 team only hitting 15%. And I think this is a look at how playing different eras and different styles of ball in these kind of imaginary tournaments would have an impact, because it's certainly true that the 06-07 team would have fired from deep a lot more than the 92-93 team. And I think this may be a matchup of two of the bigger what ifs, in Suns history.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about how I feel about 94-95, but 06-07 is the obviously the hip check year, right? So that's a big what if there. They probably win that Spurs series and nobody else is stopping them that year. In 92-93, the big what if is, if you actually guard John Paxson, you get to Game 7. What is do you win at home in Game 7 of the 92-93 finals? But I have a tough time arguing against the simulation, because it's doing a lot of math that I would never be able to compute, obviously. But I don't think it would have been a blowout. But I still think the 06-07 team would have won this.
Sam, what do you think?
I mean, it depends. This is a cop-out, of course. I don't think it would be a blowout. It depends on rules, though, because I think with the types of rules that you use, a lot of people are going to think instantly about hand checking. I think that was one of the big things to enter into the NBA realm in the early 2000s, and they're going to say, if you couldn't hand check Kevin Johnson, who was already a great slasher, he'd be able to feast on any point guard in the 2000s. But I think when you talk about that team specifically with Barkley, even more important than hand checking is, are we allowing or are we not allowing that 5-second back to basket rule? Because if you take that, that's the Charles Barkley rule in essence, right? Mm-hmm. If you take that mode of creation away from Barkley, where he doesn't get to dribble for 10 seconds and kind of just steamroll through anyone in the post because he has the size advantage to do it. And then you play him against that 2007 team, which has Sean Marion. If you could put money on any kind of modern player from the past 15 to 20 years being able to contain Charles Barkley, especially if he can't just bulldoze through you in the post, I would put good money on that player being Sean Marion. Right. So if you put Marion to contain Barkley, you hit your threes, you spread the floor. Obviously, you've got the pick and roll attack with Nash and Stoudemire. Maybe Stoudemire gets contained by the interior defense. Maybe Mark West is able to shut that down. I'm not sure. But I think 07 does have a very good chance of winning this one. Again, if you take that away from Barkley. If Barkley has that, I don't know. He might just be, because he's got, at that stage in his career, probably a 20 to 30 pound advantage on Marion, right? And right. Amari's not going to stop him either. So you have to find a way to contain Barkley inside.
But the double team factor comes into play here as well, because with Mark West playing center, and the matchup would have been against Amari Stoudemire on both ends of the court, which I think Stoudemire obviously dominates offensively. Mark West isn't stopping Amari Stoudemire, but defensively he could have cheated off of Mark West in a lot of situations to help Marion on a double team, even if Barkley had the back down that he could do. So I still think defensively they would have had an advantage there.
Yeah, I think this one came down, like if we're talking about them actually playing each other, it's a matchup. It's a matchup thing, and I think you hit the exact right point with Charles Barkley. This was the kind of the only Suns team that I think would have had a good chance of stopping Barkley. And I think if the 06-07 team was on the other side of the bracket, this would have been the final matchup. It would have been the 92-93 team versus the 06-07 team. As it turns out, it'll be another matchup. Of course, we got the 05 versus 2010 team we're going to talk about next, and that will decide the matchup. The 92-93 team did make it to the finals here in this matchup, and of course they did in real life. But, I mean, the more we talk about it, the more I can be convinced that 06-07 team would have a great chance against them. They would, of course, spread them out defensively, and I think Amari could have feasted in those scenarios. I do still think, as much as you can try to contain Charles Barkley, he was an MVP at this point of his career, and he would have still gotten his here. One thing that I do want to talk to you guys about, something that sort of broke out in our mentions, I think, of this specific matchup was the idea of Kevin Johnson versus Steve Nash. And I won't say this is Kevin Johnson at his peak, because it's just statistically it's not at his peak. And of course he shared the ball a lot with Charles Barkley, who handled it a lot at the top of the key, which took away some of the Kevin Johnson possessions. But I do wonder, I think, to me, I look at this and I always think Steve Nash was the better player. But I think people online were sort of making the case that the matchup of Kevin Johnson versus Steve Nash was either a wash for this or it favored Kevin Johnson. So, ESPO, what do you think between those two guys specifically?
Well, I think what people probably aren't taking into consideration was 92-93 was the second fewest games in a year that Kevin Johnson played. He was hampered by hamstring issues, and I believe a knee issue as well in this season. So as much as we like to remember how great Kevin Johnson was, it just really wasn't the case in this year. It was a down year. It was the second fewest points he averaged as a Sun. It was the second fewest assists in a season he averaged as a Sun. So we weren't talking peak Kevin Johnson here. So I think the argument is watered down by that. Steve Nash was healthier than Kevin Johnson in these 2 years that you're having them face off. So I actually think there's an advantage to Steve Nash there. Plus, Nash was capable of shooting the three. Kevin Johnson only shot 12% that year from 3-point land. So I mean, it wasn't a highly efficient year for him either. So I really think, I mean, it would be different if we were talking those late 80s, early 90s Kevin Johnson versus Steve Nash, maybe even that following year, 93, 94, where KJ was a little healthier, but this was really where the injury-plagued Kevin Johnson came into play, and so I think that would have been a big reason why Nash would have had the advantage in the matchup.
Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, give me 2007, the body of 2007 Steve Nash with the presence of mind of 2020 Nash to kind of know just to go around that slip screen set by Amari and fire up 10 or 15 threes per game. It's just so unfortunate that we never got to see that from him, because he had, we all know he had that Curry-esque ability, and that floor spacing is so valuable to be able to create and mold your entire offense around that. And Kevin Johnson just didn't have that. He didn't. I don't hold that against him, because if he grew up in this era, he probably would have shot threes as well. As I recall, he shot the three ball a little bit better towards the end of his career in the late 90s. But he didn't have the same sort of gravity and presence that Nash did on the court, I guess I would say. So, yeah, I'm biased because I'm young, obviously, and 93 was before I was born. But I would take Nash in that matchup for sure.
I'm old and I agreed with you, so you don't feel too bad about it.
Steve Nash was an MVP. I don't think it's a crazy take. It's not like Kevin Johnson was in the MVP consideration. Of course, he had one on his team, and that kind of helped the narrative there. But I think that it's just another case of Steve Nash's stats, just the counting numbers, not giving a full picture of his overall impact, and that can plague Suns fans as well if you're sort of just comparing it to other Suns players. There's just so much that he did for that team, and it caused defenses to constantly scramble. Recently, the New Jersey Nets versus Phoenix Suns game, which was the classic duel of Jason Kidd versus Steve Nash, that game aired, which the NBA is airing classic games. This game was one that aired, and people were watching it online. And I think so commonly, Steve Nash would just penetrate into the defense would collapse, and then the ball would whiz around 2 times, and somebody would make a 3. That's that. Unless you are tracking hockey assists, Steve Nash gets nothing for that, but the entirety of that shot was created by what Steve Nash did. And that's the type of thing I think that people tend to forget. He was an offense unto himself. He was capable of just creating so much out of so little. So I think, it's Steve Nash in that one as well. And that's not a slight to Kevin Johnson. This is a Kevin Johnson season, as Espo talked about, that was not his best. And that's why it's difficult to make that case for that 93 season. It can be argued if Kevin Johnson was fully healthy, he missed games in the playoffs of that year. It can be argued if he was fully healthy that they would have won a championship that year. So some of that can be placed on him, not any fault of his here. But let's move on to the next matchup in that second round that determines which team was going to the finals of this matchup to face that 93 Suns team, which I expected to get to the finals. It was the 1 seed after all. And this was the 2005 Suns versus the 2010 Suns. This was also relatively close, and it came down to 60.6 voting for that 2005 Suns team. And I think this was the right choice. As much as I enjoyed that 2010 Suns team, as we talked about the talent, the sheer talent that was on that 2005 Suns team, how well put together it was and how revolutionary it was, really, I think, was the right choice here. Sam, what did you think? And I can't wait, Greg, to hear the simulation on this one. But Sam, what did you think?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, but I think it's pretty easy, ultimately. To echo what you said, 2010 is a great story. It's just a great story. Putting that aside for a second, though, let's say you've got Sean Marion running in transition. He's leaking out after every rebound for the 2005 team. You've got Nash versus Nash. You've got Amari versus Amari. Who's checking Sean Marion in transition for the 2010 team? Is it Grant Hill? Is it Jason Richardson? Is it Jared Dudley? In my mind, there is no one even close to being capable on that 2010 team of containing a presence like Sean Marion to just leak out and wreak havoc in transition. You talk about other guys too. Jason Richardson, to his credit on offense, Jason Richardson was a force to be reckoned with at some points when he turned it on. You could point to the Portland series early on. I think that was the first round of the 2010 playoff run when Jason Richardson really bailed them out of some games. But even at his best, I think that's basically neutralized by Joe Johnson in 2005, who I think was a similar level of talent, similar level of secondary ball handler who could kind of initiate his own offense. So I think this pretty easily goes to 2005, unless Joe Johnson breaks his face again or something.
I even think with Joe Johnson breaking his face, it probably goes to 04, 05 as well. And, it's interesting to think about, the 04, 05 Nash versus the 09, 10 Nash and what a matchup between those two guys would be like, because you had Nash in 09, 10 who was starting to slow a little bit, but would have had the knowledge of all those runs that they made that they failed in, and would know the flaws of his own game that he would have been going up against. So it would have really been an interesting mental matchup. And in the simulation, 0405 Nash had 22 points, 14 assists, and 6 rebounds. And 0910 Nash had 24 points, 9 assists, and 3 rebounds. So it was really a wash when it came down to those guys. And I think you're completely right in terms of looking at Sean Marion as being the difference maker, because you would have had to put Jason Richardson on him just to try to combat the athleticism, and it would have been a mess in terms of trying to guard him. And in the simulation, Marion just dominated on the boards. He had 18 rebounds in this, where nobody on the 09-10 team had more than 6. And I think that probably likely would have been the case. Plus, you're getting a young Amari pre-knee injuries versus a Amari at the end of his usefulness in terms of his knees. And I think the fans got this right. Simulation agrees. They said the 0405 team would have won 120 to 107. And I think that's probably about the way this would have played out in reality. Now, that doesn't diminish that 09-10 team. They were extremely fun to watch. They were a good team, but that 0405 team was the start of the basketball revolution. And it's interesting in the simulation, almost identical from 3-point range. The 09-10 team had a slight advantage going 9 of 22, and the 0405 team went 8 of 23. So even that was kind of a wash. It just came down to athleticism of that 0405 team, it looks like. And I think that just makes a lot of sense when you put in the Marion, Amari, and Joe Johnson factor with a slightly younger Nash. It makes sense.
It's just not a good matchup for the 2009-2010 team. Amari was absolutely dominant in that 04-05 season, and like you said, a younger Steve Nash helps you out as well. But even going sort of down the line here, who guards Joe Johnson, who guards Sean Marion, that becomes pretty difficult right away. And even beyond that, Leandro Barbosa, as we talked about, was incredible off the bench there. That they would struggle to cover him as well. And you look at that 2009-2010 team, I mean, off the bench you have Goran Dragic, but it's just not quite. It's not the Goran Dragic that we all fell in love with until the end of that season, right? He was good in the playoffs, but like in a single game here, you can't count on him to be like what Leandro Barbosa was, which was an absolute spark, 6 Man of the Year player off the bench for that 04-05 team.
Let's be honest, that 09-10 team was like a photocopy of the 04-05 team. I mean, it was trying to hold on to what that 04-05 team had started, and it just wasn't quite the same. Some of the magic was still there, but it just wasn't as good of a team, and so I think it played out the way it should have.
Yeah, I agree, and it was a really close matchup. There's, like I said, 60.6 voted, and that left the 93 Suns versus the 2005 Suns in the finals here. And I had no idea who to vote for in this finals, and it looks like people were relatively conflicted as well. This was the second closest matchup. 52% voted for the 2004-2005 Phoenix Suns team, which, based on Timeline podcast listeners or at least followers online, that is now officially the greatest Suns team of all time. And I can't argue either way on this. I understand why that 05 Suns team won here. I think that it can be argued that Charles Barkley was the best player in this matchup, but that 2005 Suns team was a better put together team. But what do you think, Greg? And what did the computer think?
Well, look,
because that's all that matters.
Yeah. Greg, we don't need you next time. We're just going to use the computer. But thanks for letting us know about it. Now, I looking at it, this was a very, very intriguing matchup. But I think again, it comes down to style of play, like we've talked about throughout this, and athleticism. And I think it would have been very close, but a young Amari, a young Joe Johnson, Steve Nash starting to discover what his powers truly are in this league, and Marion, I think, would have given 04-05 the advantage. And again, crushing for me to say, to as somebody that holds that 92-93 team near and dear, but I don't think they would have had the firepower. The simulation mimicked kind of that feeling and the feeling of the fan vote. It was a 2-point game and a 2-point victory for the 04-05 team, even though that they were the guest, the away team, since they were the lower seed. But they pulled it out in the end, and it was came down to basically a 2-point difference in the third quarter that wound up winning it there for these two teams. So it would have been an ultimate matchup, and I think that, to me, that suggests in the end that the fans probably got the two best Suns teams of all time into the finals, and that they voted it right in terms of the way it would have played out.
See, but that's interesting because the computer, and again, it doesn't really matter what the simulation thinks, but the simulation thinks that 2005 beats 93 by 2 points, right, Greg?
Correct.
That's what you said.
Yep.
It thinks 2007 blows them out.
Well, I actually think the 2007 team, if you take out some of the weirdness that happens in the playoffs, is a better team than 04-05 in the end.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, there we go. And I kind of wanted to bring that out because that's interesting to me. So 2007 lost to this team in the poll. 2005 beat it. I wasn't under the impression that the general consensus was that 2005 was actually a better team because, I think on a surface level, so much of the focus about 2005 versus 2007, the first thing you would think of is, well, okay, it's Q Rich and JJ, Joe Johnson versus Bell and Diaw, because those are the main guys who are different in the core. But there's just other things that we have to think about. Like Steve Nash didn't win MVP in 2007 because of voter fatigue. It would have been his third straight, but it was probably his best of those 3 years with the way he averaged a career high, close to 19 points per game. Absurd efficiency. He shot 53% from the field, close to 46 from deep. You had the difference of Leandro Barbosa being sixth man of the year in 2007 versus not really being quite that consistent presence in 2005. Honestly, in 2005, I think you could compare him more to Goran Dragic, what Goran Dragic was in 2010, as we were just talking about him. And like even just small little micro developments in a guy like Amari Stoudemire, who kind of mid prime was able to start developing that mid-range jump shot a little bit more maybe than what he had a couple years prior in 2005. So I think I'm right there with you as well. I think 2007 is a better team than 2005, and therefore maybe it's the 2007 team that is actually the best team of all time, even though it didn't even get into the finals.
But I think this is where fan voting is somewhat problematic, and this is not a knock on anybody that voted in this poll. I think it's just simply, when we think back on 04-05, right, it's fresh. It's new in terms of the way that they came out and they played. It was coming off a 29-win season the previous year. So in our minds, I think looking back, we more fondly remember the 04-05 team because it was a pleasant surprise and captured our imagination, where 07-08 was that year of the hip check and Donaghy and all these things that wind up just clouding our view of that team. I think is a big reason why probably with the fan voting it went the way that it did.
I think as well, Joe Johnson, the people who are voting have the hindsight of understanding that in 2006, 2007, Joe Johnson averaged 25 points per game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So they look back at that 04-05 team, and I think it has more of that sort of, wow, that team was really good factor to it, that sort of Warriors mentality of this team was stacked with all-stars, and had they stayed together, they would have been the best. So I think you're right. I think that 07 team was better as well, actually. But I think there's so much going into it mentally, of understanding who those players became and who they were after that season, that so many fans look back on it and say they wish that team had stayed together. And I think they're right. I think I still personally harbor weird feelings towards Steve Kerr after trading Sean Marion away. And I imagine there's a lot of that going on with Joe Johnson as well, and just losing Joe Johnson on this team. So that's it. That's what people voted for. So I want to thank everyone who voted. This is already a very long episode, so I'll go ahead and let you guys go now. But thanks to everyone who voted on this. Tell us if you're right or if you're wrong, if you have different opinions, if you're insane. Let us know what you thought about how we discussed. Let ESPO know. Make sure to follow ESPO at ESPO, ESPO. And of course, listen to the solar panel. ESPO, do you have anything else that you'd like to plug?
No, I just I want to thank you guys for having me on, and thank you guys for the work you put in. It is obviously a labor of love with your show, that you do a lot that is great, and I'm glad Suns fans have this as well to listen to, because you guys do a great job. So congrats on that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. Sam, you got anything else?
That is it. Thank you very much for the kind words, Espo. Listeners at home, if you have any criticism about this episode, direct it right at Espo. His Twitter handle is... What is your Twitter handle? Is it just...
It's just at Espo.
It's
so
just
it's a great
at
Twitter
Espo.
handle.
ESPO.
One letter away from ESPN. It's a great Twitter handle. But thank you once again. Thank you everyone for participating. If you have any ideas for our next week's episode, feel free to let us know. We're still running on fumes here.
Yeah, this was a fan idea. So this was created by you guys, really.
All right, we'll be back next week.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in the new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series premiering Sunday, June 6th, only on Showtime.